Yes, I was. Okay, we're coming up in five. Hey, everybody, welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It is a joy to be with you today in this blessed season in which we have seen Ramadan, Passover, and Easter intersect as they always do. And I hope that all of my friends of all faiths have had a blessed holy season. Holy season. Easter is a holiday that I have been commemorating since, I mean, I'm Christian. And I just hope that the blessings of this season pour down upon everyone. Pour down upon everyone. Oh, the lessons we could learn from Jesus the Christ, fighting the power, taking on the government and saying an unjust government. An unjust government. Remember, he was charged with stirring up the people. How dare you tell people that they have the right to fight for the right? Think about that, everybody. Think about that. But he came, he said, to set us free, to give us an abundant life. And that wasn't just prosperity gospel, everybody. That was for us to be treated fairly, justly. And I'm so glad to have you, Michael Ratner Scholar, Institute for Policy Studies, Curie Peterson Smith. This is one of my personal heroines, and I know she's one of yours. Medea Benjamin. I'm always so honored and thrilled when I have her on the show because number one, I know she's my heroine, but then I know she's not in jail. So I'm very glad because I don't know when I see one of these hearings, I know she's going to be in the audience and something's going to happen. But I tell you, I laugh and I joke about this all the time, but we all need to have that spirit. And I think more and more Americans are having it. I have caught this spirit, have caught a spirit that you have had. I think you were born with it, my dear Benjamin, because we have an obligation to correct our society. Dr. King taught us that we had an obligation to break unjust laws. Slavery was legal, it just was not right. It was illegal for women to vote. It just was not right. Some women broke the law. Hurling herself into the steeplechase, Medea Benjamin. And she killed herself. She lost her life trying to publicize the fact that women didn't have the right to vote. And she would rather have died or not lived than be disenfranchised. Think about that, everybody. Think about that. As we pray for all of our brothers and sisters everywhere who are living under the boot of oppression, we're going to be talking about Yemen as we talk about the weaponization of anti Semitism. We're seeing more and more of our students deported. We're seeing Americans pulled off the streets. We're seeing permanent residents sent to El Salvador. And be very clear, let me go back to the point that or should I say the example that I just pulled up. President Trump said he's going to look for some homegrowns. Now, you know what that means. That means anybody's vulnerable. First, they're going to come for people of color because the question is with us, well, what are you doing here? Why are you here? This is really not your land. But ultimately, it's going to hurt and hit everybody. So let's talk about this because now more and more Jewish academics and progressives, and even people who might not have considered themselves Medea Benjamin to have been progressive, they are saying, wait a minute, you're not doing this in my name. You're not going to threaten to defund Columbia to the tune of $5 billion. It's not $400 million, it's $5 billion. I realize Harvard has got a massive endowment. Oh my goodness, a fraction of that endowment, what Howard could have done, and Johnson C. Smith and Lincoln. The HBCUs never had access to that kind of money, and the land grant colleges are owed $17 billion right now by the government. But now we've got something dangerous happening, Medea Benjamin. This weaponization is now beginning to have another kind of effect. People are now beginning to blame all Jewish people for what is happening in the Middle East, for the deportations, for the diminishing and the eradication of our civil rights and liberties. And it's right wingers who are doing this. Period. Full stop. I mean, last I checked, Clarence Thomas is not Jewish, but he is in this. And Alito is in this. But what do you think about this weaponization? Because even President Trump said, he was castigating American Jewish people, as was Steve Bannon. You are hurting Jewish people everywhere. Wow. I said, what is this? So, but dear Benjamin, the weaponization of anti-Semitism, it takes the real meaning out of it, because anti-Semitism is a very, very real thing.
Absolutely, Santita. And I often get comments from people who say, oh, you're Jewish, go to Gaza, let's see what they do to you there. And I say, well, I've been there 7 times. And every time I went, I made it clear that I was Jewish. And the love and affection was even greater, because they said, how do we convince the American people we are not against Jewish people? But here we have our own government and institutions that are now making it a law that anti-Semitism can be defined as criticism of Israel. So it is really very dangerous to the Jewish people. And as you well know, there are so many Jewish people here in the United States and around the world who are horrified by what's happening. I just watched a video clip of the right-wing extremist from Israel, Ben Gvir, who just landed in Miami. And as he came in, there were these Jews who were screaming at him, you racist, you don't care about the Palestinian people, you don't care about the hostages. And so it is so important to try to separate those two things precisely at a time that so many people in our government and in the Congress, where I see them on a regular basis, are trying to equate those two things, anti-Semitism and criticism of an apartheid genocidal regime.
Well, what do you make of what is happening with laws? I mean, even Chuck Schumer has tried to push laws that would really penalize you for any criticism.
We should have seen this coming a long time ago and done more about it. I remember when the states were passing laws saying that if you want to get a contract with the state government,
yeah,
you had to, basically say that you were opposed to boycott, divestment, and sanctions, and sort of pledge your allegiance to Israel. And we allowed that to spread from state to state to state. And now it's happening at the federal level. And, I see, Corey, your head shaking, and I'd love to know what you think about this, because I really do think there is such a generational divide on this issue. And thank goodness that young people like you are seeing through this.
Amen to that, please, because it is a generational divide. Well, isn't that what Jonathan Greenblatt said in his meeting? Of course, he's the head of the ADL, yes? And he said, yep, you all are missing this. You keep thinking this is right, left. I'm telling you, this is a generational fight. We've lost the next generation. We've got to do something. I'm like, I don't know what they can do. Corey?
Yeah, Jonathan Greenblatt has some expertise on that, because his own young Jews on his own staff revolted against the ADL because they've been on the wrong side in so many things. And actually, during the 2020 uprisings in response to the police murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, where the ADL, which claims to be a civil rights organization, its primary work has been not only advocating for Israel, but really attacking any critics of Israel as so-called anti-Semites. And central to their strategy has been collaboration with police departments. And so during 2020, the young people on the ADL staff were like, wait a minute, we see our generation in motion, against racist police violence, against white supremacy, and increasingly in support of Palestinian rights. And it seems like we're on the wrong side here. And Jonathan Greenblatt fired them. So, there's the generations right there. But I really appreciate, and I really agree with what Medea said about the kind of, we could have seen this coming in a lot of ways. This has been part of the pro-Israel playbook, is to accuse any critics of Israel of being anti-Semitic, and that has unfortunately been a bipartisan, project, with some exceptions, in the Democratic Party who've been willing to go ahead, and those exceptions are growing and growing more vocal, thankfully. Officials who are willing to actually criticize U.S. support of Israel. But then they face, they have faced, a response, including from their party leadership, like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, that says this is anti-Semitic. And so what Donald Trump is doing is what Donald Trump does, which is taking things that have been part of U.S. politics and take them to the extreme, right? And now, in the name of fighting anti-Semitism, is launching one of the great waves of repression in U.S. history. What is especially ironic, or maybe just sharpens it or gives us more clarity, is that Donald Trump so embodies the latest anti-Semitic threat, actually, because he, of course, embodies the today's iteration of white supremacy, right? Like there has been rising anti-Semitism actually in recent years. We think about the Tree of Life shooting, in Pittsburgh. If we think about other attacks on synagogues. These have been carried out not by Palestine activists, but by white supremacists who are allied with or aligned with, MAGA and Donald Trump. And so Donald Trump is both fanning the flames of anti-Semitism and then using the charge of anti-Semitism to launch this wave of repression. And it is extremely dangerous, as you said, Ms. Santita, for everybody. But that includes Jewish folks, I mean, now what they're doing is saying, we are snatching people off the streets and disappearing them, into cages in Louisiana and elsewhere in the name of defending Jews. So you have the most controversial figure in the world, Donald Trump, saying that he's speaking up on behalf of Jews. How's that going to end up for Jews? Not well, right? So we have to have a movement that is standing with Palestinian folks and confronts their cynical rhetoric on anti-Semitism, and frankly confronts anti-Semitism, which is one of the many aspects of white supremacy right now.
Can I add something there, Corey? Because I think genocide does breed anti-Semitism, and I know a lot of people are becoming more and more. It's more and more difficult for them to stand up for some of the members of the Jewish community who are not speaking out. On the other hand, look at who are the people that are being picked up by this administration. And at first I thought maybe they made a mistake, like with Mahmoud Khalil. Maybe they didn't realize that this guy was so generous and close to the Jewish community. And he was such a mediator and a peacemaker. And then I thought, well, look at the next ones that they picked up, like Rumeysa Ozturk. And I've met some of her friends. And Corey, you probably know well about her case because it's in your state. But she is just the sweetest, nicest, most precious person who would never say anything anti-Semitic. And then you see this Mohsen Madawi, another student from Columbia who was picked up, who's actually a Buddhist and says so many Jewish friends, and they are out on the streets now standing up for him to say that he was always there with us. So I now understand it's not a mistake that they're picking these people up. It's intentional, and it adds another layer of insidiousness, if that's a word, to what they're doing.
I think that's so important because there is, for folks who are not familiar with our movement that's been in motion, especially these past couple of years in response to this genocide in Gaza, if you're just hearing about Palestinians on TV or when Donald Trump talks about them, then I guess you could be convinced, you know what I mean, that there's some problem of anti-Semitism kind of flourishing in our movement. The honest truth is the movement for Palestinian rights has historically and certainly today has not only at its center Palestinians and Palestinian Americans, but Jewish activists, folks like Medea Benjamin, organizations like Jewish Voice for Peace, and If Not Now. This is
and Phyllis Bennis and Ariel
Phyllis
Gold.
Bennis, right? That's right. That's right. I mean, like it's I would go so far as to say, if you've been to a protest for Gaza in the past couple of years, especially if you're in one of the larger cities of this country, it is impossible not to encounter Jewish activists. It's just not possible. And so folks like Mahmoud Khalil and Ramesa Öztürk, who have been going to meetings, who I mean, Mahmoud, this is a key leader at Columbia. He is not only, it's impossible he's not in community with Jewish activists. And then when the question of anti-Semitism came up at Columbia, he was the one to speak up and say, whoa, that doesn't belong in our movement. Last time I was on your show, Miss Santita, we talked about Mahmoud being disappeared in Louisiana, and when he finally was able to speak about his experience, he wrote this incredible letter. He opens it by saying, "Who has the right to have rights?" And in doing that, he is drawing upon the great Jewish philosopher Hannah Arendt. I mean, this is our movement, right? It includes Palestinians and Jews and Black folks and indigenous folks indigenous to this place. It's a diverse movement, and that is what they want to crush. And part of that is because it precisely points to a world where we're all working together to figure out how to get free, and they cannot abide by that.
But where do we go from here with this? I mean, because Medea Benjamin, while we're having this conversation, on the other side of this conversation is a real movement to push these, not just students, but pushing people out of the country. And I'm wondering what they're going to do to Americans. Just will you be denied entry into universities? And look, I went through that, because of my parents' stance on Palestinians more than 40 years ago. And I know what I went through, and I've talked about it with my Harvard interview. It was a doozy. And, and they ended up saying, they had to fight to get me in. And my mother said, whoa, wait. She's a merit scholar. You called her. Okay. Mm-hmm. And my mother said, I did not want her to apply. She already has full scholarships. I don't want her to go to Harvard because I'm not impressed with what you have produced for my community. Mm-hmm. So whatever my daughter wants to do for graduate school is on her. But what you produce for my community, what did Carter G. Woodson say? They've ruined more great Black minds than bad liquor. Mm-hmm. Our leaders came from Morehouse and North Carolina A&T and Fisk and that's where they got. That's where they made their bones on the undergraduate level. And so, but it was, Santita, will you be independent of your father and his politics? In other words, will you disown him? Will you throw him under the bus? And this was 1981. Now you're seeing Black and Palestinian students pay an even higher price than anyone at Harvard and at these schools. And it's almost as if they have no, well, what does Castro say? History will absolve me. But in the meantime, they're being blackballed. They're not able to get their jobs. And it's like, you can't say anything, Medea.
Yeah, I just read a very a scary thing in the Institute of Higher Education today that said that this administration has either revoked the legal status or changed it for over 1,000 international students or recent graduates. I mean, we know some individual names that we've just talked about, but this is over 1,000. And it said in this article, talk to students who are afraid to go out of their house to buy groceries.
Absolutely.
I mean, when you hear a Republican senator like Lisa Murkowski say she's afraid, we're all afraid. We are afraid. Somebody asked me the other day if I was censoring myself, and I said, no, I wouldn't do that. And then I realized as the day went on, I am constantly censoring myself. And, we are some of the boldest ones out here. And if we're doing this, it's happening all over. And the fear is really palpable. And I am just amazed and so proud of these young students, and particularly the Palestinians, like the Palestine Youth Movement,
Yeah.
that continue to lead protests out there without masks, totally vulnerable. So I think we take our cue from them and we say, if they are going forward, people who have a lot to lose, then certainly people like myself who are white, retired, don't have to worry about my career, have so many advantages in the sense of the government, not, well, we don't know if they're going to start go after citizens, but at least our voices should be totally out there. But I do have to say that we are scared, and that as our organization Code Pink just in the last 2 weeks has been attacked 3 times in Congress. One by Tom Cotton, who said he called on the Attorney General to investigate us for being for our ties to the Communist Party of China and to Hamas. And then we got a similar letter coming from Senator Jim Banks. And then the worst of all was the most recent one from Chuck Grassley, who is not only an old-time senator, but he is the ranking member or the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. And he has asked the Attorney General to investigate us for violations of the Foreign Assistance Registration Act, FARA. There is zero credibility to all of these accusations. But, it's like this: once a big lie is out there, how do you turn it around? And we're just waiting for the hammer to come down, not just on us, but other organizations. And Corey, your organization, the Institute for Policy Study, is one that's known for its very progressive politics on so many different issues. Environmental groups are really scared about what's going to happen to them. And we are waiting for things to get worse before they get better.
Get worse? What would that look like, Medea Benjamin?
Well, they're trying to take away the nonprofit status of Harvard University. Imagine what they're going to try to do to tiny little organizations like ours. Try to get our nonprofit status taken away from us, do something around our funding, our bank accounts. Who knows? But it is it's times that are very much feel like people must have felt during the McCarthy days. And some people say already that it is worse because the net is much wider.
Medea Benjamin, and Corey Peterson Smith, this paints such a horrifying picture for us on the micro and macro level internationally. When I say, just when people are reading the papers all over the world, they're saying, what is going on in America? But then you've got these students who are being deported or who are frightened. They're calling home. They're saying, they're telling the truth about what's happening here, and it's horrifying. Do people realize what this is doing to us as a nation in terms of our reputation? And so much of, we've been able to hold on to the dollar, which is not happening anymore, but because we had a reputation for freedom and justice and liberty. Although, that's not true, but at least we got frightened into doing something. You put on the cover of Pravda, Black children getting bitten by dogs and getting fire hosed. Now, I don't think there's a sense of shame. Medea, there's no sense of shame.
Well, there is a big fight back happening now, and I was very proud to see Senator Van Hollen going to El Salvador. And
now, let me ask you this: why were you glad to see him go to El Salvador? Because I had some people who are his constituents who felt ambivalent about that.
Well, they shouldn't, because it's not like he's not doing things for his own constituents. He's a very centered and principled senator who has been very concerned about the people of Maryland. And he took a day out of his time to go to El Salvador because Kilmar Garcia is one of his constituents, lived in Maryland. And if the president is allowed to disobey a court order, that bodes very, very ill for the rest of us. But let me say one other thing, Santita, before I have to leave you, which is that I am very pleased to see the kind of pushback that's been happening, not only by people like Senator Van Hollen, but also the grassroots and the kinds of big protests that have been happening around the country. I know I'm anxious to get back to Washington, D.C. There's an encampment outside Union Station of federal workers that are doing daily teach-ins, and I think mirroring some of the best things that were happening on the student encampments. But I do want to say that while I am totally 100% in favor of the protests that are happening now, I wish that the same people who are coming out to those protests had been coming out to the protest against Palestine, for Palestine, and would be as concerned as they are about their own jobs, federal workers losing their positions, as the people of Palestine who are losing their lives on a daily basis. So we have to figure out how to merge those and make people feel that it's their responsibility. If they care about this democracy, it's not just about what DOJ is doing to destroy our government or what's happening in terms of the attacks on immigrants. It's also about our foreign policy. And I know you're going to get into Yemen with Corey, which is so important, but to talk about how the U.S. continues to have a foreign policy that is literally killing people, mostly civilians, on a regular basis. And that has to also be foremost in the minds of people who are concerned about what Trump is doing to this country.
Well, empathy is important, Medea Benjamin, even though that is something that the tech bros, Elon Musk, has said, hey, I don't have the empathy chip. I don't have it. And I'm like, that's not something you should brag on. And, really, I mean, because, I'm clear that he also struggles. He's, he said he has, different emotional challenges. And I have a great deal of sympathy and empathy for him. It's just that it says something about us as a nation. You have so many broken people who've been exalted to run it.
Yeah. So let me just leave saying thank you so much for having me on, and how good it is to see you, Corey. I look forward to seeing you in person sometime. And thank you for the very stimulating conversation, Santita.
Sending you so much love. Always my heroine, Medea Benjamin, Code Pink co-founder. Lover, lover, lover. God bless you.
Bye-bye.
Peace, Medea.
Well, I mean, so where do you see this going? I mean, because I think that I'm reading, when I read articles, I read comments. And the comments are disturbing to me.
Yeah, me too.
Because I'm like, I don't think you all understand what you're doing. And because they've also been doing it for so long. And they've been unchecked. I can criticize everybody but you. That for Americans, that might work for a minute, but it's not going to work. It's not going to work for long. Because it's just like, it's wonderful when kings and queens visit here. We're happy for them. But you can't be royal and be in the United States at the same time. We just don't do that.
Right.
It's like, it's like, okay, that's lovely, but we just don't do that. And so I'm trying to find out just really what all of this means, because there is a generational divide, but we are at a place where all of these generations are living together at the same time.
Yeah.
In the meantime, we have got people who are being gathered, who are being rounded up every day. Wait, I mean, look, we're black in America. You know that has happened to black folks all the time. That's not
Yeah.
new. It's happening to everybody, and I think we have to be very honest about that. Everybody, this is something that does not shock Black Americans, because you can be standing on your stoop and get pulled into a police car, and that's all she wrote. That has
Yeah.
been The police force was created to catch us who were escaping slavery,
Literally.
literally.
Yeah.
So we kind of get this. That having been said, now everybody's in the dragnet.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think though that, I mean, you're 100% right. And, you know, I'm it works the other way around too, though, because it's been happening to us for so long, to our communities for so long, and they're deploying things that they've piloted against us to other folks. But then that's also going to come back to us harder. Do you know what I mean? Like, you know, so when they're talking about stripping birthright citizenship or saying that that's actually not a right, where did that come from? That came from the amendments following the Civil War. I mean, that was about Black folks, you know, the idea of birthright citizenship and naturalized citizenship.
Wait a minute, because they wanted to throw us out. Now they said your work here is done. Now it's time for you to leave.
Right.
Lincoln said, if I could keep slavery and if I could hold the Union together and keep slavery, I would do it.
Mm.
But you got to read Forced into Glory by Lerone Bennett.
Mm.
He tells the truth. I'm not mad at anyone. I'm glad that even with all of that, there were workarounds, and you had a Frederick Douglass who agitated.
Mm.
You had the Barnetts. You had so many people who were saying, no. You're right. You came up with America, but guess what? You're not alone, because number one, this is land that you did not buy. It's land you stole, and you did not work it. We did. So we're all in this together. Got it? Good. Yeah, I mean, no, that's the end of it.
Yeah.
To me, that's the end of that. So my question is, I mean, so what do you see? I mean, because you are, you know, generations away from both of us. What are young people saying?
Well, it's a complicated picture, just because, I mean, like, because on one hand, yeah, there's a real generational divide, you know, and some of that is hopeful, frankly. I mean, there are, for example, you know, the notion that criticizing Israel is anti-Semitic, you know, and that Israel is this kind of embattled, I mean, this is the Joe Biden narrative, you know, that Israel has to be protected from all these hostile neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
That is, on one hand, that was never accurate, but when I mean, talk about empathy, when I look generationally, you know what I mean, and I look at 1967, you know, 1973, and I can. And I put myself in, you know, a Joe Biden's shoes. I think, okay, I can understand why you would believe that this is the case with Israel. You know, from his background, the people he's been exposed to, the ideas. If you're in my generation, what you're learning about Israel is that it's this embattled, you know, place, but it's this genocidal, you know, state that's on the offensive all the time. And so a lot of
they're going after South Africa. You know, it's like, whoa, wait a minute.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of folks, you know, younger folks today who are like, anti-Semitism, what are you talking about? I can see on my phone that they're bombing people in tents. You know what I mean? And that's not, that was not, you know, previous generations did not have access to like a real-time live stream genocide. So there's something hopeful about the fact that on one hand there is different kind of access to information now, and I think that younger folks are less burdened with the kind of baggage of what it means to stand up to, U.S. violence and the violence that the U.S. supports around the world. On the other hand, we just live right now in the U.S. This is a very fragmented society, actually. I mean, I am old enough to remember when the news was like the 6 o'clock news, and if you would turn it on at 6 o'clock, and there were 3 channels, and that was it. And if you there was one newspaper. If you're in a big city like Chicago, maybe 2. But where I grew up, there was one newspaper, and you check that out, and that was the news. And now people are consuming media from all kinds of sources, and it can be hard to tell actually where different pockets of this country are at. So it makes it hard to know, where things are going. And I think that part of the work of movement folks, of social justice minded folks, is trying to pull together, what is a very fragmented society, and say, how are we going to have a set of conversations that invites different pockets in? We don't want to reproduce this fragmentation. You know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, we share this place. We've got to figure this out.
But no,
Right?
but that would be absolutely. But that's why I've not spoken disparagingly of the
Mhm.
president. I'm like, look, he has people who love him too. Okay,
Right.
I'm done with that. I mean, I never even started it. I don't like that. If
Yeah.
you're going to ad hominem attacks, don't work for me.
Yeah.
If you're going to don't go after him. Go after his policies.
Yeah.
And then, but also leave space to meet with him to see if there is something that he can access for all of us. Do it. You might be the one to make the argument for education, public education. I mean, the way things were is not the way things always have to be.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have to think about that. So,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, and especially how do we? It is. Well, let me put it this way. I mean, Medea spoke to this. There's a lot of folks across this country in the streets now,
Yeah.
and a lot of them voted for Trump. I mean, a bunch of those folks voted for Trump, and they were like, "Wait a minute! I didn't think it was going to look like this."
They're at the
Now, what's that?
They're at the Bernie AOC rallies.
Exactly. Now, do I feel some kind of way? Because Trump was having rallies where he had big banners that said mass deportation. That's what he was telling the truth, that this was going to happen, and now it's happening. And so I can understand why there are folks who are like, what do you mean you didn't expect this? But I think I think that it is on us to, and I think this is always true. This is my politics, it's my values. There has to be some path to join the larger collective and say, however you voted, let's have a conversation about where we're going now. I don't think we can shut people out and say, well, you voted wrong, so forget it. I'm never talking to you again. I can sympathize, you know what I mean, with that sentiment because our communities are being torn apart. It's incredibly violent. As Medea mentioned, or Mesa Azturk, that's my neighbor. You know what I mean? Like, she was snatched off the streets not far from me. And that's happening all across this country. So I understand the anger, and this hurts, man, to see folks treated like this. And we have to find a way to say, we may have disagreed in the past. We can have a conversation now. Where are we going together? I don't want to be the one putting up a barrier between somebody coming to the rally. You know what I mean?
My mother said, no, my pastor's wife said, may she rest in peace. You know where you've been, you don't know where you're going. And it's dangerous to forget. I'll carry many of those wonderful sayings with me for the rest of my life because it's true. And I'm just when I look at the generational divide, it is real.
Mm-hmm.
What is also real is now when you point a finger, your thumb really eventually all point back to you, and that's what we're looking at, and that is what is unsettling to me. But like you said, I mean, this is where we have to get engaged,
Yeah.
and we
Yeah.
have to get involved. So you tell me. I know I only have about 10 minutes or so left. We've been hearing about Yemen,
Yeah.
and I'm trying to figure out if we really know where it is, who lives there, basically, what is going on.
Mm.
And I mean, just tell me how is Yemen being distorted? It's a wonderful piece that you wrote in Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, by the way.
Mm.
It's a
Thank
wonderful.
you.
What's going on?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you for this opportunity to talk about Yemen because, you know, not only government officials, not only the Pentagon when they talk about Yemen, but in all mainstream media across the board, whenever we hear the name of the country Yemen,
You know,
we hear we always hear Iran-backed Houthis. You know what I mean?
what
We
does that
cannot.
mean?
Yeah. In the same way that when we hear about Lebanon, we hear Iran-backed Hezbollah. And the idea is that Yemen is not actually a place with a, a people or a history. It is all just a kind of screen for this caricature of Iran that they make up as this kind of puppet master pulling the strings behind everything bad in the Middle East. Um, and so I appreciate the opportunity to talk about Yemen on its own terms. And so this is, yeah, it's a country on the Arabian Peninsula. This is there's a group of folks there's that is governing much of it right now, most of it. Called Ansar Allah, which is that's what they call themselves. They're also known as the Houthis because they're from a part of Yemen called Houth, Al Houth,
Mhm.
and this started out as a movement that's both a religious and political movement. That was basically fighting in a civil war about the direction of Yemen.
So do you
And
do you see that? I mean, will it continue?
well, what's happening now is that it's not so much a civil war as much as the U.S. is waging a war there that is escalating. I mean, I do think that at the moment, yeah, the U.S. is planning to not only continue this but deepen it, and that's important to say because the U.S. has been bombing Yemen for about 20 years now. I mean, it was one of the first countries that the U.S. started bombing after 9/11. And they did all kinds of special operations, cruise missile strikes, drone strikes, and things like that. Under the Biden administration, there was a much more, well, I should say, in response to the Israeli offensive in Gaza, this armed force, which, like I said, is now governing most of Yemen, said, well, wait a minute, you're bombing these people in Gaza that don't have an army, they don't have an air force, and you have your ally, the United States, who is intervening to support Israel, and they said, well, we're allied with the Palestinians, so we're going to intervene actually against Israel. And what they did was, Yemen borders the Red Sea, which is a major shipping, a body of water where so much of the world's commercial shipping goes through. They said, well, we're not going to let ships pass, and we'll use armed force to prevent them from passing. And they started, carrying out missile attacks toward Israel as well, right? So that happened, and it's worth noting that during this latest ceasefire that Israel has violated now, but the ceasefire that was agreed to late last year, when it happened, when Israel and the Palestinians entered a ceasefire, the Houthis honored it. They said, okay, if you guys are no longer shooting at each other, we're no longer going to shoot at Israel. We're no longer going to shoot at ships. And they didn't. So they honored the ceasefire, actually. And just like Israel went ahead and carried out operations in violation of the ceasefire, the United States went ahead and started escalating its bombing in Yemen. And what Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, said was very interesting. He said, we're going to do this bombing until the Houthis declare that they're going to stop their attacks. And the word "declare" is important because they had already stopped their attacks. They stopped. They stopped fighting Israel. They stopped attacking any ships. But he says, no, we don't want them to just stop. We want them to come and say, we will not attack or whatever. They wouldn't take yes for an answer. They already stopped fighting. And so the U.S. is bombing now. And the truth is they are digging in for something much deeper and longer. They are working on expanding their military presence in the region. They just deployed another aircraft carrier to the Middle East that is related to this attack on Yemen. And they're talking about expanding their bases in Africa, actually, which, Yemen is right across from the Horn of Africa, where the U.S. already has a large base presence. And so they're talking about a new round of militarization in Africa as well that is related to this war in Yemen. So I'm really concerned about this. And I think that we need more attention to it and really to stop it before it gets worse.
It's just, this is amazing to me that we've got all of this going on. And it's like we're asking the wrong questions, Corey.
Mm.
And I don't know. And the narrative is so controlled.
Mm-hmm.
You can go from cable network news, all of them, to just, I guess, terrestrial news, just the regular newspaper and news stories. It's the same thing. And it's such a big miss right now. It's such a big miss, because we don't even know where Yemen is.
Right.
We just hear, okay, we hear from someone we do not trust.
Mm-hmm.
Yemen bad, get them out.
Exactly.
I did not add, I left off the S for a very specific reason. Well, and I mean, so we're just moving forward. What can we do to help people, to help the people of Yemen?
Yeah.
Because this is so off.
Yeah.
The true story is not being told, right?
Exactly. And I think that we have to, and this is what you and me and Medea have been talking about this hour, is it's a fantastic thing that people are going into motion against the Trump administration. And I think we have to make sure that that U.S. foreign policy is part of it. You know what I mean? Because part of what Trump does is divides and conquers.
Yeah.
So he said, there are people who are outraged and disgusted by what's happening to international students, to other immigrants, to undocumented folks. And there are people who are really scared about the threats against Social Security. And Trump says, well, I'm not going to touch Social Security. Don't worry about that. And the idea is to pick off those people who are concerned about Social Security so that they're divided from those of us who are raising our voices against the attack on immigrants. And we need to say, no, we're all together. So we want you to stop attacking immigrants, stop attacking Social Security, right? Stop attacking the Palestine movement. And also, I think we need to say, this has to be about foreign policy too.
Oh, yeah. Why?
We're not going to go home when you say, oh, don't worry, we're going to leave. We're not going to attack your particular community.
Why is it important to bring the specter of that in?
I think for a lot of reasons. First and foremost, because the people of Yemen deserve to live. You know what I mean? And I know there are folks in this country who are going to say, well, I'm concerned about my community, and I hear that. We can have a conversation. I'm going to say, my community is the whole world. It includes the people of Yemen, and they deserve to live. They've been bombed by this country for 20 years, and they don't deserve that. Just like we don't deserve that, they don't deserve that. So that's number one. But the other thing is, U.S. foreign policy, it ends up being used domestically to repress us too. And I just think about, I've been thinking a lot about the fact that before 9/11, in the late 1990s, there was a real movement in this country against police brutality. You remember there was this movement against, when police in New York City killed Amadou Diallo, 41 shots,
Yes,
killed an
yes,
unarmed
yes.
black man, right? Killed Patrick Dorisman, tortured Abner Louima. NYPD was a target of protest, and Rudy Giuliani was a target of protest. And then 9/11 happened, and it was United We Stand. We all have to have national unity and go to war. And all those protests against police brutality were sidelined. You know what I mean? And I just think about, man, the kind of conversations that we had in 2020, where finally we're talking about slavery and its role in the foundation of this country. Finally, you had a president finally say something about the Tulsa Massacre. It took a century, right? Tulsa Massacre happens in 1921. Biden talks about it in 2021, right? It took a century to acknowledge that this thing happened, right? This anti-Black white supremacist, attack. And that was because of our movement. And I just think, what if this had happened 20 years earlier? What if we had not been set back by the war on terror, which not only was a disaster for the people of Afghanistan and Iraq and Yemen, but that kind of United We Stand, that was used against us here. So that's what happens, and I am very concerned. They're sending more and more U.S. troops into the Middle East. They're deploying another aircraft carrier next to Yemen. They're putting them in harm's way. And so far, U.S. troops have not been killed. They've been bombing Yemen. They've killed dozens of Yemeni civilians, by the way. The U.S. has. They've injured hundreds. Americans have not been killed, but they're sending so many troops and so many sailors that I'm concerned that an American will be killed. And when that happens, it's going to be support our troops, all the protests need to stop, national unity, et cetera, et cetera. So if folks here are not thinking about folks in Yemen, A, I think you should be. I'm going to make the case that you should be.
Mm-hmm.
But B, you may not be thinking about folks in Yemen, but this war against Yemen will be used against us to silence our protest also.
Right. That's right. One thing leads to another.
That's right.
I mean, always.
Always.
I'm giving you the final word. Okay. What should we be listening for, looking for? Where can we read more of what you have written? Because you're really helping us to understand not only all that's at stake, but some people are walking around looking very nondescript, and they're very much in this. Very much in this. And something's got to give, and it should not be us.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I'll name one resource, something called the Yemen Data Project. Okay. I subscribe to their email list, and they send out email every couple of weeks, and they say, this is how many people are being killed in these bombings that the U.S. is carrying out.
Oh, yeah.
And, that's important because, again, the story that's told in the mainstream media is that somehow Yemenis are the aggressor here. And look at the data. How many Americans have been killed by Yemenis? Now, how many Yemenis have been killed by Americans? All right, so get yourself some access to some facts. Highly recommend Yemen Data Project. And just what you just said, this is what always happens. Every time, it's true, because every time the U.S. carries out a war abroad, there is repression at home. During World War II, as the U.S. is fighting in Europe and Asia, they round up 100,000 Japanese folks, here. And they silence protests. When the U.S. is waging its war in Vietnam, we have COINTELPRO and all kinds of repression here in this country. And I bring up that history not just to say that this is how it's gone, but to say the point of learning history is so we don't have to do it again. We don't want to do this again. So let's stand up to the repression now and stand up to the wars now, so that we don't have a repeat of what happened before.
Corey Peterson Smith, I can't thank you enough, because I think we keep hearing Yemen and all of these other issues bandied about. No one's explaining. You knew Santita Jackson show was not going to let him get away with that. I had to explain it to you, and I want you to like and share. Gotta do it. That's my obligation. We've got to do this. Corey Peterson Smith, Michael Ratner Scholar from the Middle East at the Institute for Policy Studies. Brilliant, brilliant young man. And I'm so glad that you came to be with your family today.
Me too, Auntie. It's always such a pleasure.
Sending you so much love. Love you, Mildred, Bernadette, Andre, all you people, Brian, Shalom, Carol. Oh, I mean, I'm just sending everybody so much love today. So much love. And may God bless y'all real good. See you tomorrow on the Santita Jackson Show, AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota.